Welcome to the Medford Township Public Schools. We're very happy to have you as part of our team and are excited to see the great things that will come out of your classrooms, offices, and buildings over the time you spend with us. Over the course of your career here, you will undoubtedly face challenges that make you wonder about the career choices you have made. However, it is important to always remember that no matter what path you take in life, you will face obstacles, and overcoming them is what makes you stronger. Here in Medford, you're not alone. That is what this presentation is all about. While it focuses primarily on the rules of the game, those rules and the conversations and work along the way are designed to support you, grow you, and make you as successful as possible, not only for yourself, but for the students you work with. American philosopher Sidney Hook put it this way: everyone who remembers his own education remembers teachers, not methods and techniques. The teacher is the heart of the educational system. If we reflect back on our own educational experiences, we will all most likely think back to a person and how they made us feel. We don't necessarily think back to that one amazing lesson objective or the round robin reading we had to endure. No, we think of the educator. While research-based instruction is important, what is also important is that we work together to help each other be the best educator for our students and for them to remember educator, the educator that reaches a student who would otherwise be lost and sets them on a trajectory of success, belonging, and purpose. That is what the evaluation should be about: feedback, growth, and reflection. The information in this presentation are the laws we're required to follow, but it's important that we remember that at the heart of it all is teaching and learning and making sure we are doing our very best for our students. My name is Mark Damon, and I'm the Director of Personnel here in the Medford Township Public Schools. I started in this district back in 2009 as the principal of Kirby's Mill Elementary School. After 8 years, I came to central office and worked in the curriculum department, helping to infuse technology throughout our classroom and curriculum, and then took over as Director of Personnel in June of 2023. If you ever have a question regarding any matter related to your job, contract, certification, or evaluation, please reach out to me. If I can't help you, I'll be sure to point you in the right direction. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of what AchieveNJ is and what it means for you. To begin, you need to understand two interrelated concepts: TeachNJ and AchieveNJ. Essentially, TeachNJ is the law that was passed that looked to raise student achievement by mandating expectations and guiding principles of a revised teacher evaluation system, improved professional development, and the streamlined use of data to make personnel decisions. AchieveNJ, on the other hand, was the actual plan that implemented the TeachNJ law. As an educator, you won't hear much about TeachNJ, but you will hear quite a bit about AchieveNJ. What you need to know is that without the TeachNJ law, there would not have been an AchieveNJ. And that whether we agree with it or not, whether we like it or not, and whether we find it effective or not, the evaluative practices of our district are not unique to Medford, but are legally required throughout the state of New Jersey. Here's a brief side-by-side comparison of what I just described of TeachNJ being the law and AchieveNJ being the plan that implemented the law. In this presentation, we will look at each big idea of the TeachNJ law and its application through AchieveNJ. You can see those listed in the top row, and they include a more robust evaluation, including rubric with 4 rating categories. SKIP conducts evaluations and supports growth. Mentoring program required by law. ongoing professional development and individual professional development plan, corrective action plan, a 4-year timeline for tenure acquisition, tenure acquisition linked to evaluative ratings, and finally, a streamlined arbitration process. Along the left side, you can see the various categories of employees within our school district impacted by AchieveNJ. The check marks indicate which categories apply to which groups. As we go through the components, I'm going to break down each one into 3 categories, and each icon will be displayed in the top left corner of the slide so you know which category we're on. The overview, it will let you know the background and the explanation. The impact will let you know what component impacts your evaluation and employment. And finally, the action steps. These are the steps you will need to take for each. You're going to want to pay attention to all categories, but most importantly, the action steps. If you do not write down and follow through with the action steps in this presentation, it will catch up with you at some point, and it will make your job more difficult. Let's start with the first component. More robust evaluation, including rubric with 4 rating categories. Every area of your evaluation must be equated to a 4-category scale. The 4 categories are ineffective, partially effective, effective, and highly effective. Here you can see the cutoff score for each of those 4 categories on the 4-point scale. Depending on the type of staff member you are, your final evaluation rating is calculated from 1, 2, or all 3 main areas. The teacher practice tool, which consists of the observations and the summative write-up your supervisor completes on you. Student growth objectives, which are teacher-created goals that measure student growth in specific areas over the course of a period of time. And finally, student growth percentiles, which are scores assigned based on student performance on standardized tests. Medford Township Public Schools currently utilizes a form we call the Aggregated Collection of Evaluation Data, or the ACE form. This form is set up at the beginning of each year and is used to track all of the data from the teacher practice tool, the summative evaluation, the student growth objectives, and the student growth percentile. It automatically compiles each score based off the weighting each area receives, and it provides the final rating. Here is where we get to action step number 1. If you have not set up an ACE form yet, you need to touch base with your supervisor and/or mentor to get you set up. Now, back to our overview of the robust evaluation. Medford Township currently uses an evaluation rubric for teachers and administrators called McCrell. This rubric is standard for all instructional staff, but modified versions have been created for those holding educational services certificates like nurses, speech therapists, guidance counselor, and child study team members. Remember, though, that no matter what type of staff member you are, your summative score at the end of the year all feeds into one of those 4 categories we saw a couple slides ago. When we take a look at the McCrell evaluation form, you will see that the terms they use for each category are different than we previously saw for AchieveNJ, where AchieveNJ uses ineffective, partially effective, effective, and highly effective. McCrell uses the terms not demonstrated, developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished. Now I know what you're thinking, but wait. You said that all ratings are based on 4 categories, but McCrell uses 5. Yes, that's correct, and thanks for paying attention. Here's how those 5 McCrell categories feed into the 4 category rating scale required by the state. As you can see, there are 2 opportunities to fall into the highly effective range. 1 for proficient, 1 for partially effective, and 1 for ineffective. It is important that you know what it is exactly a supervisor will be looking for when they conduct an observation. McCrell is broken up into 5 standards. Each standard then has a number of elements under each that are looked for during evaluations. Let's take a look at each. Standard 1, teachers demonstrate leadership. This standard typically is not evaluated during a classroom observation. Instead, it is done in your year-end summative because these 4 elements, classroom leadership, school leadership, profession leadership, advocacy for schools and students, and ethical standards, they're not necessarily observable in a single classroom lesson, but they're better evaluated over the course of the entire year. You should also know that as we go through the standards, most of the ratings you will receive will be at the proficient level. Accomplished ratings can be common, but many accomplished scores and certainly distinguished scores are not activities that you would typically do in the classroom, rather what you do outside the classroom, like around the school, for your profession, and in the community. So know this going into an observation. You will not be getting distinguished ratings straight down the board. If you don't use this lens, you will undoubtedly be disappointed with your observation. Proficient ratings are the norm, with accomplished scores quite attainable, and distinguished scores, while much more challenging to attain, have a more widespread impact on the school and professional community. Standard 2, teachers establish a respectful environment for a diverse population of students. This primarily focuses on your learning environment and how you treat students as individuals with individual needs and learning styles, and how many times they come with a backpack of personal troubles that need to be addressed in order to get to the learning goals you establish, and how you work with those students. Standard 3, teachers know the content they teach. Do you know what it is you're teaching? Are you making your content accessible to students and relevant to their interests? Are you following the district curriculum? Talking is not teaching. Teaching is when learning is taking place, and the only way that can happen is if you find the creative and unique ways of matching students' abilities and interests to the learning goals of the curriculum. Standard 4, teachers facilitate learning for their students. What types of materials do you have to engage your students? Are you teaching your small group learners the same exact way you delivered the whole group lesson? If so, you're missing some of your students. Have you looked to build a learning community in your classroom? It's great that you have students sitting in groups of 4 desks pushed together, but how are you leveraging those groups to help students capitalize on each other's strengths? Have you looked for authentic ways to measure students' learning? How have you leveraged technology to get you immediate feedback on student understanding so they don't go home with misconceptions, misunderstandings, and missed learning? Standard 5, teachers reflect on their practice. Like Standard 1, this standard typically is not evaluated during classroom observations. Instead, it is done in your year-end summative because these 3 elements, analyzing student learning, linking professional growth to professional goals, and functioning effectively in a complex dynamic environment, they're not necessarily observable in a single classroom lesson, but are better evaluated over the course of the entire year. Those are the areas that a classroom teacher will be observed during the course of the year. Those are the same areas for the summative evaluation, which is the final evaluation that dictates the final staff rating. Now, the Medford Township Public Schools have created a companion document called an evidence document. This is a resource that you can review that provides you very specific tools, activities, behaviors, and concepts that you can consider infusing into your instruction. This is not an exhaustive list, nor is it a checklist that must be completed. However, your second action step is to locate the evidence document and give it a quick review so you have a better understanding of each of the McCrail elements. You should be able to access this by going to your Google Drive and searching for evidence document. If not, consult your supervisor or mentor, or you can reach out to me and I will share a copy with you. So, how many observations are completed on a staff member? Well, it depends on your tenure status and the type of staff member you are. Non-tenured staff are required 3 observations per year of a minimum of 20 minutes per observation. If you're here for less than 40% of the year, you're only required 2 observations. Tenured staff are required to have 2 observations per year of 20 minutes per observation. If you are on a corrective action plan, which we'll talk about later, you're required to have 1 additional observation over and above the numbers in this chart. Tenured staff who hold educational services certificates are only required to have 1 observations. These observations are done on a separate form that is similar in layout to the McCrail document used for teachers, but more aligned to the practices and professional activities of those positions. In terms of advance notice, staff must have at least 1 unannounced observation per year and 1 announced observation. The announced observation consists of a pre-conference where you will talk about your plans and lessons ahead of time with your observer. Also, all observers are required to do 2 co-observations per year to ensure inter-rater reliability. In other words, to make sure that all observers are observing staff in relatively the same fashion. If you are co-observed, you'll have 2 administrators in your room, but only one of them will be the observer on record. The other administrator is just there to see the lesson and debrief with the other administrator afterwards. You need to remember that the observations are snapshots of what was seen during the time of your lesson. It is not to capture all the activities throughout the year. That is why in many cases, observers don't evaluate standards 1 and 5, because those elements can't necessarily be seen during a class lesson. If you get a developing, or even if you receive a distinguished, that doesn't mean that will be your final rating for the year. That was just the rating for the observed lesson on that day. It is the summative, that is the written report at the end of the year, that brings in all the data points throughout the year and provides you the final breakdown. I talked about the teacher practice tool, but earlier in the presentation, I also mentioned things like student growth objectives and student growth percentiles. All 3 of these, depending on the type of teacher you are, weigh into your final rating. So how does the teacher evaluation practice score you get on your summative count towards your final rating? Generally, for teachers of tested subjects, that's English language arts and math in grades 4 through 8, the teacher practice tool is 70% of your final rating. Teachers of non-tested academic subjects, for example, middle school science, social studies, and K-3 teachers, the teacher practice tool counts as 85%. And finally, teachers of related arts like music, art, and physical education, it counts also as 85%. And those holding educational services certificates like nurses, librarians, counselors, and child study team, the teacher practice tool is 100% of your final rating. So here is another important action step. For most of you, your evaluation will be done in the McCrell online system. You will need to have an account to access your observations and professional development plan. You do not have an account right now. In order to get an account, email Mark Damon at mdamon@medfordschools.net and request an account. Provide your name, building, and position. You will receive an account and a welcome email that will guide you through the setup. Once you have set up your account, you will need to create your 2 PDP goals in the system. Consult your supervisor or mentor for help with this. After the teacher evaluation tool, the next part of your final rating is the student growth objective, or SGO. This applies to all instructional staff, but does not apply to educational services certificates. You will need to discuss SGO creation with your supervisor, as this can be a bit confusing if it's your first time. In a nutshell, though, the SGO process involves utilizing an assessment or series of initial data points to determine each student's readiness level as a baseline. Then you create individual goals for your students to achieve that are rigorous yet attainable. Finally, at the end of instruction, whether it be a unit, topic, marking period, or year, you give a final assessment to determine whether or not the students made the progress you identified. As with the other components of the teacher evaluation, the success of the students dictates a score between a 1 and a 4. Generally, for teachers of tested subjects, ELA and math in grades 4 through 8, SGOs count for 25% of your final rating. Teachers of non-tested academic subjects, such as middle school science, social studies, and K-3 teachers, SGOs count as 15%. And teachers of related subjects, like music, art, and physical education, it's also 15%. Finally, staff holding educational services certificates like nurses, librarians, counselors, and child study team members, you do not have SGOs as part of your final rating. At this point, you will want to jot down your next task. You will need to create 1 to 2 SGOs and fill out the SGO section of your ACE form. Consult your supervisor for guidance on SGOs and examples other teachers may have used to get you started. Finally, the last component of your evaluation is the Student Growth Percentile, or SGP. There's very little that you have to do about this part of your score because it's calculated by the state and is based off your students' performance on standardized assessments. SGPs are only for teachers in grades 4 through 8 who teach English language arts or mathematics. SGPs are a way of measuring how students perform on a state assessment compared to other students across the state who scored similarly the prior years. Scores are on a scale of 1 to 99, and then those scores are converted to a 1 through 4. Let's look at an example. Pretend Barry, our purple friend, is a student in your 6th grade class. Barry scored a 228 on the 3rd grade assessment, 230 on the 4th grade assessment, and 220 on the 5th grade assessment. These scores don't even fall within the range of the NJ SLA, but these are for example purposes only. Barry will now be assigned a peer group by the state with students from around the state who all scored similarly on their 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade assessments. You can see from the other students' scores that all the other students in Barry's peer group all had about the same score as Barry did in each of the 3 prior years. Now, let's say we get the 6th grade scores back. Barry scored a 221, which may seem great because he scored higher in 6th grade than he did in 5th grade. However, look at how all of the other students in his peer group scored. Of all the students who scored similarly to Barry in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, all but one outscored Barry. So even though Barry improved his score in 6th grade, he did not grow as much as his peer group. As a result, Barry's student growth percentile, or SGP, will end up being quite low, as he did not keep pace with his peers. Let's say Barry's SGP is, on a scale of 1 to 99, a 7. The state then takes all of the students in your class and their assigned SGPs from their own individual peer groups and puts them in order. Here, we see all the students in a class and their assigned SGP. Your SGP as the classroom teacher is the median of the scores, or the one that falls in the middle. In this case, it's a 46. That number is then converted to the 4-point scale. In this case, a 46 equates to a 3.0. That 3.0 is then included as the last component of your final evaluation. Generally, for teachers of tested subjects, ELA and math, in grades 4 through 8, SGPs account for 5% of your final rating. All other staff do not have an SGP, so there is no impact. That's the first component of AchieveNJ. Don't worry, that is the longest part of this presentation because, quite honestly, it is the most significant piece that affects you day in and day out. We'll spend much less time on the rest of these, starting with SKIP. SKIP conducts evaluations and supports growth. SKIP stands for School Improvement Panel and is a committee that is made up of a few teachers within the building. They do not conduct observations in Medford Township, but they do work with the principal to review anonymous observation data to help plan for professional development needs. They discuss the observation processes and any changes, and they work with administrators to help improve teaching and learning. I told you the rest would be quicker. Let's move on to the mentoring program requirements by AchieveNJ. 1 year of mentoring is required by law. If you do not hold a standard certificate, that's to say you have a provisional certificate and have not completed your mentoring requirements in a prior district, you will be required to have a mentor and work with them for 30 weeks over the course of the year. You, your mentor, and your administrator will be required to sign a mentor contract that lays out expectations. Then, each month over the course of the 30 weeks, you'll be required to complete a mentor log of activities and conversations you had with the mentor along the way. The contract and logs are completed online, and monthly emails are sent to remind you when to complete these forms. We do have a mentoring plan that includes a monthly checklist of topics to cover with your mentor, although you can work with your mentor on what you need the most. Moving on to the ongoing PD and individual PD plans. Each year, staff must complete 20 hours of professional development. These hours must be linked to your professional development plan. that is created and recorded in the McCrell system. So, if you have a PDP goal to improve your understanding of guided reading, and you take a workshop on using technology to improve math fact fluency, that activity should not be counted towards your 20 hours. Additionally, typical activities you complete as part of your job, for example, conducting band lessons after school, is not a professional development activity. Professional development is just that, an activity that grows you professionally. Typically, though, we do have staff create a generic catch-all goal to grow professionally to help students socially, emotionally, and academically. This will allow the majority of PD to count towards your 20 hours. After that generic goal, though, you must create a specific individualized goal to help you grow over the course of the year, and these goals must be created and approved by your supervisor by October 31st of each year. In our district, most schools have their staff create their goals prior to the end of the previous school year. New hires hired over the course of the year must create their goals as soon as possible, and those 20 hours are prorated for the amount of time you actually work. Finally, make sure you hold on to those PD certificates so you can provide documentation at the end of the year of the hours you accrued. You have an action step on this one. You need to create your 2 PDP goals and enter them into McCrell for supervisor approval. Consult your mentor or supervisor for help with this. The next component of AchieveNJ is the corrective action plan. The administrative code reads, for each teaching staff member rated ineffective or partially effective on the annual summative evaluation as measured by the evaluation rubrics, a corrective action plan shall be developed by the teaching staff member and the teaching staff member's designated supervisor. You should know that summative evaluation refers to your final rating for the year, not any one observation or singular component. CAP plans can also be put in place for a staff member where expected growth in any area, or if there is any concern that has not been addressed by the staff member, despite being offered support and having conversations with their supervisor. The 4-year timeline for tenure acquisition is our next component. As you can see from this graphic taken from the State Department of Education website, tenure is granted after 4 complete years. Prior to AchieveNJ, this was a 3-year timeline, but now the first year is considered a provisional year for mentoring, followed by 3 additional years for a total of 4 years. Moving on to tenure acquisition linked to evaluation rating. This applies not only to receiving tenure, but for tenured staff who demonstrate a pattern of ineffective performance. As you can see from this table, AchieveNJ mandates the filing of tenure charges based on a staff member's performance. If a teacher falls into the ineffective range 2 years in a row, the superintendent must file tenure charges. Similarly, if they are partially effective in 1 year and ineffective in the subsequent year, the superintendent must also file tenure charges. You can see the last 2 rows where a superintendent may file inefficiency charges. Remember, this is based on your final rating, not any singular component. Our final component is streamlining the arbitration process. I'm not going to spend much time on this as we hope no one gets to this point. However, AchieveNJ lays out the process for filing tenure charges, which is a much more efficient and streamlined series of steps compared to the process of its predecessor. That wraps up AchieveNJ overview. I know it's a lot, and don't feel like you need to have digested and processed the entire presentation in all its details. This presentation is available to you if you ever want to refer back to it. But between your mentor your supervisor, and me, you have resources to reach out when you have a question or need guidance. To wrap things up, I'm going to review one more time the action items you must complete once this presentation concludes. Set up an ACE form. You're going to want to talk to your supervisor about where to access this. Most, if not all, have pushed it out through Google Classroom. Locate the evidence document. This will help you understand the look-fors in classroom observations. Get a McCrell account by emailing Mark Damon with your request, your name, and your building. Create 1 to 2 SGOs and complete them on the ACE form. Finally, create 2 PDP goals and enter them into McCrell. Remember how we started this presentation, though. These nuts and bolts of paperwork can be cumbersome and tedious. However, while they are intended to support you in your growth and your students in their learning, you should not get so lost in the details that you lose sight of the fact that you and the relationships you form with your students are the immeasurable, but perhaps most important determinant of student success. And sometimes that success cannot be measured on a standardized test or an evaluation rubric. Sometimes it's just measured by the fact that a student shows up to school every day because it is the only place they feel safe and you're the only person they trust. Be that person for your student and build upon it. Thank you for your attention during this presentation. Again, I know it's not the most riveting of information, but it's important for you to be familiar with. Here is my contact information once again, in case you have any questions and you don't know who to turn to. Have a wonderful rest of your day and school year.